Welcome to the Time to Practice podcast. If you've never listened to the podcast before, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Christine Goodner. I'm a music educator, author, and podcaster who has made it my mission to talk about music practice and to support educators and families looking to make home practice more efficient and to reduce conflict and frustration in the practice room. This episode is brought to you by my resources for teachers and families. I have 3 books about music practice with young students available that you might find helpful. Beyond the Music Lesson, Positive Practice, which is a workbook for problem-solving early stages of practice, and Music Practice Makeover. You can find links to purchase any of these books at suzukitriangle.com/books. Anytime you purchase one of these resources, you help support the work I do on this podcast, so thank you. This week, we're continuing our series with special guest, violinist Claire Allen, all about perfectionism, perfectionist thinking, and the balance as musicians that we have of striving for excellence and treating ourselves with compassion when we inevitably find out we are not, in fact, perfect. A reminder, we are not trying to label anyone as perfectionist or not perfectionist in this series. We're being very conscious to stay in our lane as music educators rather than mental health professionals, which we are not. And none of what we say is meant to be any kind of mental health advice. Our goal is to better understand perfectionism and perfectionist thinking and to discuss strategies for music learning and music practice that can help us as musicians, as parents and caregivers, as teachers, and as any and all of the above that we fit into as our role in the music world. So far, there's been a lot of positive feedback and interest in this topic, and we're really glad to have a format to discuss this with you. Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm excited to be here with Claire Allen in the second of our series of podcasts on perfectionism and perfectionist thinking in the studio. And you can go back and listen to last week's episode. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, where we talked a lot about different forms of perfectionism and how our classical music world might, especially maybe train us in this kind of thinking if we're not careful, and how we want to just think about how we are approaching the feedback we give and the way we think about striving for excellence so that it doesn't cross over into this kind of in a negative way, I guess I'll say. So welcome back, Claire. I'm excited today to be talking about students specifically and how perfectionism might show up, but especially how we can support them.
Absolutely excited to be back. So, let's just dive right in. There are so many different ways that perfectionism can show up. And, maybe we probably said this last time, but it's also important to think about perfectionist by itself is not a monolith as an identity. Different people may show different perfectionistic traits at different points in their lives. Some of them can be fixed. I know there's definitely parts of me that have been this way the whole way through so far. I welcome growing out of them at some point, and some of them, especially for kids, might be developmental. But here are some things that you might notice when you're working with students in private music lessons or private music practice, I guess. So the first one is visible, intense frustration when learning new skills, because if it's new, they're not good at it yet.
Yes, a low tolerance or disinterest in baby steps or practice spots or slowing down.
Intense interest in comparison, rankings, or where they stand. And in violin world, this might look like an obsession with being first violin.
Yes, or what book or piece they're on in the Suzuki world sometimes.
Oh gosh. Or what chair we sit in an orchestra. Also, shout out to all the orchestra teachers who rotate chairs. You are doing such good work out there. Thank you. Please keep doing it.
So another one is all or nothing thinking.
So for example, I am first chair or I am nothing, which can come with an all-consuming fear of failure, however they define that.
Trouble setting realistic goals.
Such as, I make first chair or I'm nothing. I'm making fun of my past self here. So if anyone is listening to this and feeling called out, please know I'm not trying to speak through the webs to anyone. That was me when I was in middle and high school. It was not, and college, honestly. It was not a good part of me. If you knew me back then, I was, going through some stuff and growing.
I think this is so interesting. I have to interject because I was the people pleaser and I didn't want to be called out that I was making any mistakes by the conductor. And so I was always very happy if I was in the back of the section.
No, I wanted to be concert master. And unfortunately for me, I was in orchestras long enough where that was actually possible. But what actually calmed me down was when I went to grad school and everyone there was just at a much higher level and they rotated seating. So it was like, even in principals, they rotated seating. So it just stopped it went from something that I literally obsessed over to something that was just like, oh, now I go to orchestra rehearsal and I sit in whatever chair they tell me and play my part. And I think that's much healthier.
Right. Absolutely. And, it would have been good for me to be up in front and, and rotate as well. But I share my experience that's so different than yours because it wasn't that I didn't care or didn't have the capability. It was purely just that fear of not pleasing the conductor. And so that's where it can show up, like perfectionism can show up so differently in students, like opposite in this case.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's something to watch out for.
So next, another way it might show up, we mentioned this in the last episode, but trouble with task initiation. So getting started with things due to discomfort with the messy process of learning something. So not wanting to practice, say, for example, vibrato exercises for string players because they feel physically weird. They sound kind of weird at the beginning and it takes a long time to get good at it. So, maybe only wanting to play the parts that they feel comfortable with over and over and over again because that's what they're comfy with.
Yeah, and I'll say for some students who do find that things come easy to them academically and in other parts of their life, sometimes playing an instrument is the first time there's no escape from the messy middle, or there's no escape from I can present this as perfect, right? The first time.
Oh, yeah.
And so this can really be, in a way, it's a gift if we have healthy, supportive adults around us to have a space to work that out at a young age and to learn to make friends with or at peace with or tolerate that feeling of it's not easy for me on the first try, or I have to show someone else before this is perfect. But that can be a real sticking point for students in my experience.
Yeah, someone shared, I saw it on Instagram, a clip of an interview with Hilary Hahn recently, and it was her talking about, so-called talent, which just might be a natural ability to coordinate and be self-aware at a highly young age, is what maybe we call musical talent. And she said that can actually sometimes be a problem because if things are too easy in the beginning stages and people are like, oh, I just have this natural gift, and then at some point it gets hard, and then she says it gets hard for everyone at some point, and then you just have to work. So at some point everyone has to learn how to work, but like the easier it's been, either in your music lessons or in the rest of your life, whenever that first thing that's hard shows up, that's when it's like, oh, wait, maybe there's something wrong here. And it's not, it's just life. But yeah, I had a kid once who like the first 3 Suzuki books went really, really well. And like, then it got hard in book 4. And that was really rough for them.
Sure.
And they worked through it, but it was like, they thought it was easy and they didn't have to practice that much. And well, it turned out they did. Like everyone does.
Right. Exactly. So another related topic is an unhealthy tie of our self-worth with our achievements. So if you're that student that feels like when I do things just so that makes me a great person, that gives me my feeling of self-worth, then when you come up against this hard thing, it feels like an identity crisis or a crisis of some sort because, it's not just the way you want it. And so that can be a big one too.
Yeah, in the music world, we can see this in competitions, in exams. If let's see how to say this. There's actually some really good articles and perspectives out there on competitions at all levels that I can look up and send you to put in the show notes. I think there was a good one on violinist.com the other week.
Yes.
But this idea that, you're only worth something if you place in a competition, can be really dangerous.
Exactly.
Students would also need lots and lots of reassurance about, no, you really are good. This is sounding good, so if it feels like someone always needs a lot of reassurance just to do anything, that might be a sign that something's going on.
Right. And reassurance that the teacher's happy with me or the teacher's not upset with me, that kind of reassurance, as well as reassurance about our technique or what we're producing on our instrument, I would say. And then I think some students who fall into this category really try to avoid scenarios where feedback is given because they do not want to hear where they, are not perfect at that moment. That's me in the back of the orchestra hiding from the conductor.
Yeah, and that might mean looking like not wanting to play for other teachers, or if people do a thing, if you have studio class or group class in the studio and you have an opportunity for students to give feedback to each other and you notice that some kids really can't take that well, that's something to think about too. These students might also really expect too much of themselves and or other people, like Maybe for some people it might be reasonable to learn and polish and memorize a new piece in 1 week, but for most of us it's really not, especially depending on the kind of week we've had. But I sometimes see kids critiquing their parents, like, oh, you didn't pack the music bag right, or you didn't tighten the bow right, or whatever. In which case I always jump in and I say, hey, if you're old enough to criticize your parent for how they're doing things, you're old enough to do that for yourself, so it's not your parents' fault.
Yes, yes. High expectations because those kids are seeing that here's how I want things to go if it's quote perfect. And I see the gap, you know. I think also self sabotage or procrastination. We've talked about this in a few ways in these two episodes so far, due to a fear of failure and the fact that it's easier to be criticized for not doing something than for doing it wrong, either internally or externally. And that could be just that, well, if I don't practice, then the teacher is going to get after me for not practicing, not for not being, quote, able to do the thing that I feel daunted by.
Right. Also, extreme people pleasing, as you mentioned last episode, which was one that I hadn't really considered before we did all our research as a form of perfectionism. But, the student who says, oh, I didn't practice this very much, I'm sorry, or is constantly looking to you for reassurance. It's when, for me, again, I'm a violinist, so they're not even done with the last note and they've turned their head and they're like looking at me to see how I'm reacting. I've gotten really good at keeping a pretty straight face when my students are playing. I don't want to give anything away. It was really easy for a few years there with masks. I didn't have to work as hard to control my face, and now I have to like work on my neutral expression again.
Yes. And I think I see students looking to their parent too for approval. And there's a parent child attachment dynamic there that might not be perfectionism, but it is a good reason to kind of ask the child what they think about how they played versus did they please us
Right.
with what they played. So it doesn't mean it's about perfectionism, but could something to think about, I guess.
Also, great teaching tip here. If that's happening in lessons, I got a great tip from my teacher trainer, which was always make sure the parent is sitting behind the kid. So the kid cannot see the parents' reactions to their playing. This was years and years ago. I haven't taught this kid in a while. I think they've graduated high school now. Anyway, I vividly remember this. This was perpetual motion in Suzuki Book 1. And it was fourth fingers, because I use fourth fingers in some places and opens in others. Apologies to the non-violin, non-Suzuki people out there. But there were 6 of them. There were 6 fourth fingers that this kid had to get in this piece. And even though, and both his parents were coming to his lessons, and they were behind him, but literally every time that the fourth finger was coming up, I could see both of them like close their eyes and hold their breath until he did it, and then they go, oh. And it went for every single one. And I was finally like, okay, I gotta say something about this. Like, I don't think this level of anxiety is healthy. Like, yes, I want him to use that fingering, but the point to which the entire family's well-being is dependent on this, okay, maybe I need to find another way to approach this. So yeah, always make sure the parents are behind the kids in lessons if you've got them in lessons, and direct the kids' attention, where they can see you.
Sure. And I get it as a parent because you're like, we worked on this so hard at home. Is the child going to show our hard work to the teacher? There's a lot of really good intentions behind this and like good reasons behind that feeling of stress. If you're a parent listening to this and you're like, oh no, I do that. I think I probably did that with my own kids in their lessons as well. It's so human nature to be like, I want to show the teacher we worked on this. Is the child going to be able to quote perform it the way we practice? Like totally get all of that. And also I do think your point's really valid, Claire, is the family's feeling of calm and anxiety doesn't need to be wrapped up on the pinkies. We will continue to work on it.
Yeah. Well, and as a teacher, when you're sitting and watching your students perform and you've said it 5 million times, and are they gonna do it? I sit in my studio recitals, and some of them, if I know a scary part's coming up, I force myself to have a neutral, or in recital and lessons I go for neutral, and recitals I go for pleasant, because if they look over at me, I want them to see reassurance, and then I just make myself breathe, and it's like, it's about them, it's not about you. So yeah, as the adults and who are so connected to these children and their lives, it's very important to have some level of separation, especially if we have perfectionistic tendencies ourselves, to make sure that we're not trying to make the kids live them out for us, because we can only control ourselves.
Right. And somebody who I consider a mentor of mine in thinking about parent-child dynamics and lessons is Edmund Sprunger, and he has in his book Helping Parents Practice, he talks about just that a child needs their parents' approval and the feeling that my parent approves of me for their survival. Like it's wired into us. I need my parent to be connected with me. And so our reaction can be really impactful on them in a way that doesn't make logical sense at all. It's like, well, of course my child knows I love them, even though I made a deep sigh about their pinky not going down in the right spot or whatever else. But the child's nervous system is wired to be like, oh, there's this, something's making my parent unhappy. This feels dangerous. That
Yeah.
dynamic can happen with that, with very unconsciously. And so if you have a child who has this extreme people pleasing and is very concerned about how happy they're making you in the practice, that is where this tactic of like, okay, I can see how big of an impact this has on my child. I'm going to work on being more neutral in my reaction so that they self-assess or ask them like, how do you think that went? Or did you remember your pinkies? Or let's play that spot again and think about the pinky to use that same example you're using, Claire. Um, it's not to blame ourselves, but it's like, oh, my child could use some extra support here because this could go in an unhealthy direction if we all feel this much stress about these details.
Yeah, just, being aware of our own internal things and how that's showing up in the lesson or in the playing or the practice room. Sometimes I feel like I'm multiple people in my practice room. I'm sensible teacher Claire, which I try to be to myself, and then I'm like whiny practicer Claire, who's like, I don't wanna. No, you have to practice the place with the double B flat, or else you're gonna miss it in rehearsal. Like, come on, let's go.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um, and speaking of internal self-talk, some of these perfectionists will use self-criticism as motivation. I've talked to people who feel that thinking about what they're doing well is a waste of time. They think they can fix things faster if they just go straight to the things that they're bad at.
Right, right. And I think what comes to mind for me too is that our neurodivergent students might fall in this perfectionism category. And there was a study I read that ADHD students by the age of 12 get 20,000 more corrective comments. They just measured in this study the school day hours. This is not even talking about stuff that
Oh
happens
my
at home.
gosh.
20,000 more corrective, comments per day than their, non ADHD peers in this particular study. And so then sometimes if you're being corrected all the time, like focus, do this, why aren't you on task? And maybe for legitimate reasons that adults are frustrated with, um, it sort of becomes the way you talk to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was undiagnosed with ADHD until my early 20s. And so I do feel like I got those messages a lot in school. And
Mm.
then that's just how I decided I needed to like, pull myself together and get myself going. And I mean, I still work on unwinding that a bit. So I think we just want to take care and for those students that could be where that's coming from. It may not be anything we can control because we're talking about school hour
Right.
corrections, right now. But knowing that could be what's going on internally with our students if we see them really down on themselves is just important to keep in mind. Like maybe they're talking really negative to themselves. And maybe that's something that does need professional
Mm.
coaching or intervention beyond what we can do. But if nothing else, we can keep it in mind and have some empathy for that.
And just a little sidebar here on the professional intervention or therapy. I want to acknowledge that access to mental health care can be an absolute challenge.
Yes.
Finding the right person, whether or not they take insurance, being able to afford it. But if the resources are there, there's been times in my life where I've gone and worked with a therapist or a counselor when like I didn't have a major presenting issue or anything, but it was just so helpful to get someone's perspective on how I was operating in the world and how I was interacting with my feelings and that. So if you have the resources available to you, it could just be interesting to go for a little bit and see, hey, how am I showing up in the world and what can I learn about myself? So it doesn't necessarily always have to be a dramatic intervention if something's going wrong.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad you said that because that is very true. Even for people who have insurance and quote access, there's like 6 month plus waiting lists where I live to
Mm-hmm.
be assessed for some issues like this. I think, I am trying to balance staying in our lane as teachers here is like, this is maybe not something that we can solve as teachers for students, but as a parent, there are coaches you can connect with. There are books you can read. There are podcasts you can listen to. There are people who have resources available. So we can be creative as a parent looking for support too while we're on that waiting list or just finding what access we do have. It's just a bigger issue than maybe a teacher can solve or that we feel like we can solve by just saying pleasant things to our child in the practice. Like it may not be
Right.
enough.
Right. And one of the final things on our list of like common ways that perfectionism can show up in the music practice and lesson is one of the most ironic to me, which is struggling to connect to the body because mental self talk is so loud. And we've just talked about all the really valid, understandable ways that mental self talk can show up. But to create music, we have to coordinate and connect to the body at such a high level, and often mental self-talk can mean that just not aware of how high the elbow is or if the fingers are curved or how something is moving. It might also create tension in the body. I think I haven't looked up any official studies, but I know that when I'm mentally stressed out, my body definitely feels physically stressed out too. So just realizing that that might be happening. And the reason I say it's ironic is in the mental agony of wanting to be good and wanting to create the right sound and wanting to please everyone, we're actually making it that much harder for ourselves, if not impossible, to do that with that. So these are a lot of ways that this can show up in lessons. And if you're recognizing yourself or your students or your children in this, please know that you're not alone. I think both Christine and I have directly experienced a lot of these ourselves, and worked with multiple students who also have worked through some of these things. So it's not just you.
Yes, exactly. And we're not deciding because of, we see one or two traits in ourselves or our students that we're going to label ourselves as perfectionists. But we are going to say if you see your child, your students, yourself on this list in some way, shape, or form, this is where some strategies that we're going to share in upcoming episodes can really help you think about how do we give that extra support to a student to be as supportive as we can and do what we can to help them develop their self-awareness in a healthy, supportive way. So we are going to come back to you next week with some talks about how to nurture that body awareness that Clara is talking about. She's going to share some examples from her teaching experience. We're going to talk about giving feedback. And this is for both teachers and parents. You'll be able to use some of those ideas about feedback. We're going to talk about nervous system regulation and the way we kind of talk to ourselves and the inner critic that someone might experience, as well as emotional regulation and feeling. So that's a lot of big topics. So we're excited to come back to you with that next week. We hope this has prompted some thoughts about, what it might look like to show up with this perfectionist thinking and when we might want to offer that extra support. And we'll look forward to being back with you next time.
Absolutely.
Before we go today, if you're feeling like waiting a whole nother week for ideas and resources is too long, and you'd like some further resources now, there are a lot of them out there in the world. In the show notes from today's episode, there is a link to a handout of further resources that Claire and I created for the ASTA conference where we presented this topic last spring. And there's also a wonderful article on violinist.com by Lori Niles that summarizes that talk and gives a few strategy overviews that you could read before we come back to you next week with further details. And then also, I wanted to say that I think any musician could listen to this list of, traits of perfectionism and see themselves reflected in some way. So if you're thinking like, am I a perfectionist too? Maybe, but maybe not. I think these descriptions that we shared exist on a sliding scale, and we're digging into further resources outside this podcast could be especially helpful is when we see that these traits are showing up as very extreme or intense reactions, or that some of them are even quite debilitating in the sense that practice and learning break down and can't continue because they're really getting in the way. And especially when that happens consistently over time, not just, one bad day or something's happening and we're getting less sleep right now. And so it's hard to practice. So I do think always striving to improve is built into what we do as musicians, which we keep saying a lot in this series. And sometimes simply being aware of something, like as one listener told me, oh, maybe my procrastination is coming from not wanting to make mistakes. And I hadn't really thought of that before. That kind of awareness of ourselves or what our child or student might be experiencing does help us get out of that place of feeling really stuck and help develop some empathy, some self-compassion, and explain what's going on, and then allow us to start to take some small steps over time to address it. Human beings are complicated, and learning musical instruments is complicated. And this is really a lifelong project for some of us to learn to be kind to ourselves and maybe make friends with the fact that we can't help but see where we want improvements to happen, but that also we can learn to be kind to ourselves in the process. I know that's really good food for thought for me, and I hope you feel that way too. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and your feedback as the rest of this series takes shape and comes out week by week. Please do reach out by email, Christine@SuzukiTriangle.com, or you can send me a message on Instagram. My handle there is @SuzukiTriangle. This whole project is really a labor of love for myself, and I think Claire would say the same too. We're really fueled by going on this kind of deep dive together when we feel like we are helping other people, learning about ourselves, thinking of ways to help the students we work with, and connecting people with ideas that could help them. So we would love to hear if that is what you're getting out of this or what you've learned. That really helps give us fuel going forward. So with that, I will say goodbye for this week. Take good care, everyone.